My breathing hitched when I saw Owen start unbuttoning his shirt in the empty locker room. The sound of the last students leaving echoed in the hallways as I pretended to organize equipment, but my eyes couldn't leave him. It was a regular Tuesday at Cedar Falls High School, but something in the air felt electrified, charged with a tension I couldn't name. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like to get access to more stories like this. My name is David Mitchell, I'm 32, and for the last 8 years I've built a meticulously organized life as an English literature teacher and assistant wrestling coach in this small Midwestern American town. My routine has always been my refuge. Predictable, controlled, safe. I wake up at 6 in the morning, brew my black coffee while reviewing the day's lessons, and arrive at school promptly at 8 to face 5 classes of teenagers who prefer Instagram to Shakespeare. I live alone in a modest apartment 3 blocks from the school, a functional space with shelves crammed with literary classics and a few plants I insist on keeping alive. My social life is limited to professional interactions and occasional dinners with Rebecca Walsh, a math teacher who shows a romantic interest I pretend not to notice. I've always avoided complicated relationships, preferring solitude to the vulnerability that comes with deep connections. Cedar Falls is the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where gossip travels faster than cars on Main Street, where social expectations weigh like lead on any behavior that deviates from the established conservative norm. It's a town of traditions, family values, and where being different means being the target of whispers and sideways glances. I built my reputation by being the serious, dedicated teacher, the one who never causes problems or surprises. The school pulses with teenage energy, hallways echoing with animated conversations, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking on the waxed courts. The gym where I spend my afternoons has that characteristic smell of sports equipment, cleaning products, and young sweat. My classroom is on the 2nd floor, with windows that offer a view of the football field and the trees that are starting to turn golden this October. What you hear here is just the beginning. The complete stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. My routine has always been timed like a Swiss watch. 6 a.m. Alarm, coffee, lesson review. 7:30. Quick shower, clothes always ironed, hair combed with gel. 8 o'clock, first class, trying to get teenagers interested in Hemingway and Fitzgerald. Noon. Lunch alone in the teacher's lounge, grading papers while eating sandwiches I make at home. 3 p.m. Last classes of the day, already counting the minutes until wrestling practice. It's in the gym that I feel most at ease, curiously. Maybe because there, I don't have to pretend to be enthusiastic about uninterested teenagers. My role as assistant coach is mostly administrative, checking attendance, organizing competitions, helping with basic techniques I've learned over the years. Coach Dalton, a man in his 50s with a graying mustache and strong opinions on traditional masculinity, trusts me to keep everything organized while he focuses on the boys' athletic development. 6 p.m. Return home, simple dinner while grading more papers. 8 p.m. Reading until 10. Always classics I've read dozens of times but which offer familiar comfort. 10:30. Bed, deep sleep until the cycle restarts. Weekends are dedicated to preparing lessons, visits to the municipal library, and long walks around the city outskirts, always alone, always at peace with my chosen solitude. This routine worked perfectly for years. I was known as the reliable, punctual teacher who never missed a day, never caused drama, never got involved in teachers' lounge gossip. Rebecca tried to include me in social events, but I always found polite excuses. Birthday parties, barbecues, happy hours, all too complicated, too unpredictable for my taste. Then, September came, and with it, the change that would shatter my carefully constructed existence. It was a hot Monday when Coach Dalton gathered everyone in the gym after the last period. The athletes were restless, some still sweaty from the previous practice, when he clapped his hands for attention. Guys, I want to introduce you to Owen Fletcher, our new specialized physical trainer. He's going to revolutionize this team's conditioning. The gym door opened and he walked in carrying a heavy bag of equipment. My first thought was purely observational. Tall, probably 6'1", broad shoulders that perfectly filled the navy blue polo shirt. Slightly disheveled brown hair, as if he had just finished his own workout. But it was his smile that caught me off guard. Warm, genuine, contrasting with his physically intimidating appearance. "Nice to meet you, everyone." "You can call me Owen," he said, his voice carrying an accent I couldn't immediately identify. "I'm looking forward to working with you and taking this program to the next level." When Coach Dalton introduced me as the assistant coach, Owen walked directly up to me, extending his hand. "David, right? I heard you're the one who keeps everything running around here. It's going to be great to work together." His handshake was firm, warm, and lasted a few seconds longer than social protocol requires. His eyes, I noticed they were a deep brown with small golden flecks, studied me with genuine interest while I mumbled a polite response about being available. During that first week, I watched Owen easily integrate with the athletes. There was something magnetic about his personality. He could motivate lazy kids to try harder, transform monotonous exercises into exciting challenges, and remembered each athlete's name and personal details about their goals. He was the kind of person I had always admired from a distance, but never knew how to be. What surprised me was discovering his intellectual depth in a casual conversation after Thursday's practice. I was organizing performance charts when he approached, still slightly out of breath from the warm-up he had led. "Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help but notice the book on your table," he said, pointing to my worn copy of East of Eden. "Steinbeck is one of my favorites. The way he explores good and evil through generations. Fascinating." I was genuinely surprised. Most people associate athletic build with intellectual disinterest, a prejudice I unconsciously held myself. "You read Steinbeck?" "I devoured all of his stuff in college. Grapes of Wrath emotionally destroyed me for weeks," he laughed, a rich sound that echoed through the empty gym. "Literature has always been my escape. You must understand that better than anyone." We spent the next half hour discussing authors, exchanging recommendations, and I discovered that Owen possessed a sharp perception of human narratives that rivaled my most dedicated graduate students. He talked about characters as if they were personal acquaintances, analyzing themes with a naturalness that made me rethink my own teaching approaches. "How do you balance that with the athletic world?" I asked, genuinely curious. His smile became slightly melancholic. "Let's just say it wasn't always a choice. Sometimes life pushes us in directions we didn't plan." He didn't elaborate at that moment, but I sensed an untold story behind his eyes. There were layers to him that contradicted the initial impression of athletic simplicity. The following weeks established a new and unexpectedly pleasant routine. Owen started staying after practice for conversations that stretched on for an hour or more. Initially, we discussed strategies to improve the athlete's performance. He had innovative ideas about physical conditioning that perfectly complemented the traditional wrestling techniques I knew. Gradually, our conversations evolved into more personal territory. Owen told me about his childhood in Colorado, the son of a mechanic and a librarian. "So you see where my strange combination of muscles and books comes from," he joked. He talked about the university where he had been a wrestling team star, dreaming of national competitions and maybe even the Olympics. I shared stories about my own upbringing, growing up as an only child of teachers who encouraged me to find refuge in books when socializing proved challenging. I talked about my decision to teach, about the satisfaction of occasionally being able to spark genuine interest in literature in young minds. "You talk about these books as if they're real people," Owen observed on a Thursday, as I was explaining why To Kill a Mockingbird still resonates with modern teenagers. "To me, they are," I admitted. "They've always been more reliable company than most real people." "That's both beautiful and sad," he said softly. "I bet you have amazing stories to tell, David. Not just about books." Something about the way he said my name made me stop organizing equipment and look directly at him. There was an intensity in his eyes that I hadn't noticed before, a focused attention that made me feel simultaneously seen and vulnerable. We started texting. Initially, it was practical communication about practice schedules or exercise modifications, but it gradually evolved into more personal exchanges. Owen sent photos of college athletes he coached on weekends, accompanied by comments about interesting techniques he had learned. I replied with book recommendations or quotes I found relevant to conversations we'd had. One Friday, he sent me a photo of a spectacular sunset he had captured during a morning run, with the message, "Steinbeck would describe this better than any Instagram filter." I replied with a passage from East of Eden about the beauty of golden light, and he replied, "Exactly, you get it." These small validations started to mean more to me than I was prepared to admit. We had dinner together for the first time on a Tuesday in October at Murphy's Diner, the only decent food option in town. Owen casually suggested after a particularly intense practice, "I'm starving and you look dead tired. How about we share a real meal instead of our usual lonely sandwiches?" At Murphy's, sitting in a booth with worn red upholstery and low country music in the background, our conversation flowed naturally for 2 hours. Owen told me about his injury, a complex tear in his right shoulder during a national championship that required 3 surgeries and definitively ended his competitive career. "I woke up in the hospital knowing my life had completely changed," he said, distractedly stirring his mashed potatoes. Everything I had worked for years, all the dreams, plans, identity, it all vanished in a single bad fall. How did you deal with that? I asked, genuinely interested in his journey of rebuilding. At first, very badly. Depression, anger, self-pity, the whole package. But eventually, I realized I could use my experience to help other athletes achieve the dreams I couldn't. There's something powerful about turning disillusionment into purpose. His vulnerability touched me deeply. Rarely did people share such personal stories with me, and even more rarely did I feel compelled to reciprocate. I admire your ability to rebuild, I said sincerely. I'm not sure I'd be so resilient in a similar situation. You have more strength than you know, David. I see it in the way you interact with the athletes, how you balance patience and firmness, and the passion you have when you talk about literature. That comes from a deep place. No one had ever seen me that way before, as someone strong, passionate, worthy of admiration. Owen's perception of me was simultaneously flattering and unsettling. Our dinners became a regular thing, always at Murphy's, always conversations that stretched far beyond the time needed for a meal. Owen showed genuine curiosity about my thoughts, opinions, and experiences. He asked me questions about literature that forced me to articulate ideas in new ways, challenging my interpretations with fresh perspectives. Have you ever thought about writing? He asked on a Thursday, as I was explaining my theory about why Hemingway uses such economical dialogue. Writing what? I replied, surprised by the suggestion. Fiction, essays, anything. You have a unique way of analyzing human narratives. It would be interesting to see your own stories. The idea intrigued me. I had scribbled some short stories in college, but had never seriously considered writing as anything more than an occasional hobby. During this time, I started to notice subtle changes in myself. I woke up slightly earlier to choose my clothes more carefully on practice days. I realized I was smiling more often, that I was eagerly looking forward to afternoons in the gym in a way that transcended my usual professional satisfaction. Rebecca Walsh also noticed changes in my behavior, though she interpreted them completely wrong. You seem different lately, she commented on a Friday in the teacher's lounge. More animated, maybe? It's good to see you like that. Her observations made me uncomfortable because she was right. I felt different, more alive somehow. But I couldn't, or didn't want to, analyze the reasons behind that transformation too deeply. The small moments began to take on disproportionate meaning. When Owen and I grabbed the same piece of equipment simultaneously, and our fingers accidentally touched, I felt an electric jolt that lasted for seconds after the contact. When he laughed genuinely at one of my sarcastic observations about school bureaucracy, his laugh filled me with a satisfaction that went beyond simple social validation. One particularly cold October afternoon, Owen arrived at practice wearing a long-sleeved shirt that accentuated his physique in a way that made me look away several times. During the drills, when he demonstrated techniques for the athletes, I found myself observing the fluidity of his movements, the natural confidence of his body, the way command and gentleness coexisted in his posture. David, could you help me with this? He called, interrupting my thoughts. He needed someone to hold a piece of equipment while he adjusted the resistance for a specific exercise. We worked together for 20 minutes, our bodies occasionally brushing up against each other when I needed to stabilize weights, or he adjusted my position to demonstrate something to the athletes. Every casual proximity sent waves of awareness through my nervous system that I couldn't ignore or adequately explain. This growing physical awareness was accompanied by an emotional turbulence I had never experienced. I began to question aspects of my identity that I had always considered established and unchangeable. The moment that would change everything happened on a Tuesday in November, after our team's overwhelming victory in the regional championship. The atmosphere in the locker room was euphoric, athletes yelling with joy, Coach Dalton handing out backslaps, the sound of showers turning on and equipment being tossed into metal lockers. It was the kind of chaotic celebration that usually made me want to escape as quickly as possible. But today, I was deliberately lingering, organizing equipment that was already organized, counting and recounting materials I had already inventoried twice. My real motivation was Owen. I wanted to prolong these post-practice moments that had become the highlights of my days. He was at the center of the celebration, receiving praise for the exceptional physical preparation that had turned our team into a competitive machine. Guys, party at Murphy's in an hour, Coach Dalton shouted over the noise. Drinks on me to celebrate this historic victory. The athletes exploded in more shouts of approval, quickly starting to disperse to get ready for the party. In 15 minutes, the locker room was almost empty, just the echo of distant voices in the hallways and the intermittent sound of dripping faucets. Owen approached as I pretended to adjust the arrangement of dumbbells that definitely didn't need adjusting. I could feel his presence even before I saw him. I had developed an almost supernatural awareness of where he was in any environment. "You're not going to the party?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the now silent locker room. I looked up, and my breath literally caught. Owen was taking off his practice shirt, pulling it over his head in a fluid movement that gradually revealed his torso. It wasn't the first time I had seen him shirtless. School locker rooms don't offer much in the way of privacy, but something about this moment, the intimacy of the almost empty space, the soft light filtering through the high windows, made my perception become hyper-focused. His chest was defined without being exaggerated, the obvious result of years of disciplined training. Dark hair covered part of his chest, running down in a thin line along his stomach. But it was the scar on his right shoulder that completely captured my attention. An uneven, clearly surgical mark that stretched from his collarbone almost to his armpit. "Parties aren't really my thing," I replied automatically. Although my voice sounded strange even to myself, my eyes involuntarily traced the lines of the scar, and I realized I was staring in a completely inappropriate way. Owen noticed my gaze, and instead of covering up or showing discomfort, took a step closer. "This one," he said, gently touching the scar with his own fingers. "Reconstruction surgery. 3 titanium screws and a new perspective on life." His voice carried a vulnerability I had never heard before. Softer, almost intimate. The way he talked about the scar, not with shame or self-pity, but with a mature acceptance, made me admire him even more deeply. "That must have been awful," I murmured, surprised by the sincerity in my own voice. "Losing something so central to your identity." "It was. But it also taught me that we're much more resilient than we think." He took another step closer, now just an arm's length away. "Sometimes we have to completely break to discover who we really are, underneath all the expectations and fears." The locker room was completely silent now, only the distant sound of music coming from the party in the main gym. The light was starting to fade. It was almost 7 p.m., and November in Cedar Falls means early darkness. But there was something electric in the air, a tension that made every inch of my skin feel more sensitive. "David," Owen said my name softly, like a question and statement at the same time. I looked directly into his eyes for the first time in that conversation and saw something that made me swallow hard. It wasn't just friendship or professional camaraderie. There was an intensity, an interest that I recognized because I had been feeling the same thing growing inside me for weeks. "There's something I need to tell you," he continued, closing the final distance between us. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, the smell of his skin mixed with deodorant, and that trace of sweat that resulted from an intense afternoon of training. My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. All the conversations, all the dinners, all the text messages, all the moments of casual proximity from the last few weeks suddenly rearranged in my mind with crystal clarity. This wasn't just friendship. It never had been. "Owen," I started, but my voice came out as a hoarse whisper. I had no idea what I was about to say, but he didn't give me a chance to find out. He leaned in until our faces were inches apart. I could feel his breath on my skin, see small details I had never noticed. A small scar on his chin, longer eyelashes than I had realized, the way his lips were slightly asymmetrical. "I can't pretend this is just friendship anymore," he murmured, his voice low and intense. "I can't pretend I don't think about you constantly, that I don't look for excuses to spend time together, that I don't feel something every time you smile or talk about something you're passionate about." Before I could fully process his words, he closed the final distance between us and pressed his lips against mine. The whole world stopped. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he was giving me a chance to pull back. But when I didn't, when, instead, I heard a low groan escape my throat, he deepened the contact. It was as if an emotional dam I didn't even know existed broke all at once. Years of restraint, of denial, of living a carefully controlled life fell apart in that moment. My hands found his shoulders, warm skin and firm muscles under my fingers, and I pulled him closer. Owen responded immediately, his own hands sliding down my waist, pressing me against him until there was no space left between our bodies. I could feel his heart beating against my chest, a frantic rhythm that echoed the uncontrolled pulse in my temples. The kiss deepened, full of an urgency that years of careful friendship had built. His tongue touched mine and I practically trembled with the intensity of the sensation. Every touch seemed to awaken nerve endings I didn't know I had, creating waves of pleasure that ran from the base of my neck to the tips of my fingers. Owen gently guided me back until my back touched the metal lockers. The cold metal against my shirt contrasted dramatically with the heat radiating from his body pressed against mine. His hands tangled in my hair, fingers gently massaging my scalp while his lips moved from mine to explore my neck. The sound that escaped my throat when he found a particularly sensitive spot surprised me with its own intensity. It was a low, almost primitive groan that echoed in the empty locker room and made me blush even in the middle of my rising excitement. "David." Owen whispered my name against my skin, his voice hoarse with desire. The sound of my name on his lips, laden with so much desire and tenderness, made something inside me completely melt. My hands began their own exploration, tracing the muscles of his chest, following the line of hair that went down his stomach, stopping at the scar that now represented not a weakness, but a story of overcoming that made him even more attractive in my eyes. The texture of the skin was slightly different there, rougher, and when I touched it gently, he sighed against my neck. We moved as if we were two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. There was a naturalness in the way our bodies adjusted, as if we had done this 1,000 times before. Owen tilted my head back, exposing more of my neck to his attentions, and when his lips found the spot where my pulse was beating wildly, I thought I might pass out from the pure intensity of the sensation. Time lost all meaning. Minutes or hours could have passed. I was completely lost in the feeling of being so close to him, of finally allowing my body to express what my mind had denied for weeks. Every kiss, every touch, every shared breath seemed to confirm something I had been desperately trying to ignore. When we finally separated, we were both breathless. Owen kept one hand on my waist, the other still tangled in my hair, as if he didn't want to let me escape. His eyes were dark with desire, lips slightly swollen from our kisses, and there was an intensity in his expression that made me feel like he could see straight through all the defenses I had built over the years. I started, but I couldn't form a coherent sentence. My mind was trying to process what had just happened, but my body was still buzzing with residual sensations. "Amazing," Owen completed, his voice still slightly out of breath. "David, that was absolutely incredible." He tried to pull me in for another kiss, but reality started to seep into my foggy consciousness. The distant sound of voices in the hallway, the sudden memory of where we were, the growing awareness of the implications of what had just happened. It all hit me like a cold wave. Panic began to settle at the edges of my mind. What had we done? In the school locker room? Where anyone could have walked in. Where colleagues, athletes, even Coach Dalton could have discovered us. I stammered, pulling away slightly, creating physical space that I hoped would help me think more clearly. I don't know what. "It was real," Owen said firmly, his eyes searching for mine. "This is real, David. What's between us is real." But I was already backing away, both physically and emotionally. I grabbed my bag with hands that were slightly trembling, avoiding his gaze because I knew that if I looked directly at him, I might lose myself again in that moment of intensity that both frightened and attracted me. "I need to go," I said quickly, heading for the exit. We need to forget this happened." The words sounded empty even to me, but fear was speaking louder than anything else. Fear of the consequences, fear of change, fear of facing aspects of myself I had spent 32 years avoiding. "David, wait," Owen called, but I was already almost at the door. "Please, don't run away from this. Don't run away from me." I stopped for a second, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. "It wasn't a mistake," he continued, his voice laden with a desperate urgency. "Maybe it was impulsive. Maybe it wasn't the ideal place. But it wasn't a mistake. Not for me." Those were the last words I heard before I ran out, leaving Owen alone in the locker room, both of us individually processing a moment that had irrevocably changed everything between us. The following week was the most elegantly disguised hell I had ever experienced. I kept my usual routine with an almost obsessive precision, woke up at the same time, brewed the same black coffee, arrived promptly at the same classes. On the outside, I continued to be the reliable and predictable Professor Mitchell. On the inside, I was completely shattered. I avoided Owen with a dedication that bordered on art. At practice, I arrived exactly when needed, kept myself busy with administrative tasks on the other side of the gym, and left immediately after warm-ups. When our eyes accidentally met, which happened with a painful frequency, I immediately looked away, pretending to be absorbed in spreadsheets or conversations with athletes. He tried to approach me several times, On Monday, he intercepted me in the hallway after my last class. "David, we need to talk," he said, his voice full of a contained urgency. I mumbled something about being late for a non-existent meeting and practically ran in the opposite direction. On Tuesday, he tried a more subtle approach, asking about modifications to the exercises during practice. I answered in monosyllables, keeping my eyes fixed on the papers in front of me. On Wednesday, I found a message on my phone. "We can't pretend it didn't happen. Please, give me a chance to explain." I deleted it without responding. On Thursday, another one. "I'm respecting your space, but this can't go on forever." I deleted it again. On Friday, the longest message. "David, I know you're scared. I am too. But running won't make these feelings disappear, for either of us." Each deleted message felt like it was tearing a piece of my soul away. The athletes started to notice the obvious tension between us. During practices, the atmosphere became strange, charged with an awkwardness that even teenagers absorbed in their own dramas could perceive. Coach Dalton made a few subtle comments about team communication, but thankfully didn't investigate further. Rebecca Walsh also noticed changes in my behavior, although she completely misinterpreted them. "You seem stressed lately," she commented in the teacher's lounge. "Maybe you should go out more, socialize. There's that new coffee shop downtown." I smiled politely and mumbled something about being busy with grading, but her well-intentioned concern only intensified my guilt. Rebecca was a genuinely good person who deserved honesty, not the polite lies I had been serving her for years. The nights were the worst. I would lie in bed reliving every second of that moment in the locker room. The texture of Owen's skin under my hands, the sound of my name whispered against my neck, the feeling of being completely alive for the first time in years. Then the memory would turn into panic as I imagined all the ways it could have ended disastrously. What if someone had walked in? What if an athlete forgot something and came back? What if Coach Dalton decided to check the equipment? What if Rebecca passed by the gym? The catastrophic possibilities multiplied in the darkness, fueling my anxiety until I was wide awake at 3 a.m., sweating cold. Even worse were the moments when I tried to imagine what it would be like to embrace those feelings instead of running from them. What would it be like to have dinner with Owen not as casual friends, but as, what? Partners? Boyfriends? The very word made me shiver, not with repulsion, but with pure terror at the change it would represent. I spent hours analyzing every interaction we had in the last few weeks, reinterpreting conversations through this new lens. The dinners at Murphy's, the text messages, the moments of casual proximity. Everything took on new meanings that I had been deliberately blind to see. How could I have been so naive? How did I not realize I was developing feelings that went far beyond friendship? On Friday night, exactly 1 week after the incident, I was grading essays on The Great Gatsby when my phone rang. It was Owen. I let it ring until it went to voicemail, but he called again immediately, and again. On the fourth try, I answered with trembling hands. "David, thank you for answering." His voice sounded relieved, but determined. "I know you've been avoiding my calls, but we need to work this out." "Owen, I started, but he interrupted me gently. "No, let me talk first. I've spent the whole week thinking about what happened, about how you reacted, about what it means." He paused, and I could hear him take a deep breath. "I understand you're scared. Honestly, I am too. This wasn't something I planned or expected when I got here." I closed my eyes, his voice sending familiar waves of warmth through my chest. "But I can't pretend I don't feel something real for you. I can't pretend that moment was just impulse or confusion. And I know you feel something too. Otherwise you wouldn't have responded the way you did." "Owen," I tried to interrupt, but he continued. "I'm giving you an ultimatum, David, and I hate that I have to. But I can't keep working alongside you, pretending we're just colleagues, while you act like I'm a contagious disease." His voice grew firmer. "Either we admit what's happening between us and try to figure out what to do with it, or I need to request a transfer to another school." My stomach dropped. The possibility of losing Owen completely, not just romantically, but also as a friend, as a colleague, as a presence in my life, hit me with a force I hadn't expected. "That's not fair," I murmured. "You can't just force a decision like that." "I'm not forcing anything," he replied softly. "I'm just being honest about my limits. I can't be your casual friend when I feel so much more than that. I can't pretend professional normalcy when every time I look at you, I remember how perfect it was to kiss you." His words literally made me tremble. "I'll be home tomorrow morning until noon," he continued. "If you decide you want to try something real, not just a casual date, but genuinely explore what could be between us, show up. If you don't come, I'll understand you chose safety over possibility, and I'll respect that. But I'll also start looking for positions at other schools on Monday. Owen, I started, but the line was already silent. I spent the rest of the night and all of the early morning awake, walking around my apartment, sitting on the bed, getting up again, making coffee I didn't drink, picking up books I couldn't read. My mind was a complete chaos of contradictory arguments. On one hand, there were all the rational fears that had dominated my life. Cedar Falls was a small, conservative town where being different meant being isolated. My career could suffer if non-traditional relationships became public knowledge. My carefully constructed reputation as the respectable and reliable teacher could evaporate. Rebecca would be hurt and confused. Coach Dalton might react badly. The athletes might lose respect. On the other hand, there was the memory of that moment in the locker room, the feeling of being completely alive, authentic, connected in a way I had never experienced. There were all the conversations with Owen, all the dinners, all the small intimacies that had made the last few weeks the best of my adult life. There was also the growing realization that my safe life was, in fact, a beautiful prison I had built for myself. When was the last time I felt genuine passion for anything other than books? When was the last time I woke up looking forward to something other than the familiar routine? When was the last time someone saw me, really saw me, the way Owen seemed to? At 5 in the morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, staring through the window at the gray dawn of Cedar Falls. A sentence from East of Eden, the book Owen and I had discussed at our first real meeting, echoed in my mind. And now that you don't have to be perfect, you can be good. Maybe I had spent so much time trying to be perfect, the ideal teacher, the ideal colleague, the ideal man according to standards that weren't even my own, that I had forgotten how to be genuinely good to myself. At 6:30, I showered and dressed more carefully than my usual morning routine required. At 7, I stopped at a bakery on the way to buy 2 coffees and some croissants. A weak excuse, but I needed something to carry, something to do with my nervous hands. At 7:15, I was standing in front of Owen's apartment door, my heart beating so hard I was sure the neighbors could hear it. It took me a full 5 minutes to muster enough courage to knock. Owen opened the door still in his pajamas, hair disheveled and eyes slightly swollen from sleep. When he saw me standing there holding coffee and pastries with a look of absolute panic, his entire face lit up with a smile that made me remember exactly why I had made this terrifying decision. "David," he said softly, as if my name were a prayer answered. "I'm here," was all I could initially murmur. Then, more firmly, "I'm here. I don't know how this is going to work. I don't know how we're going to deal with all the complications. I don't even know what I'm doing exactly. But I can't pretend I don't feel something for you anymore. I can't live hidden from myself anymore." Owen pulled me into the apartment, closing the door softly behind me. Then he took the coffees from my trembling hands, placed them on a nearby table, and wrapped me in a hug that made me feel like I had finally come home after a very long journey. "Thank you," he whispered against my hair. "Thank you for choosing courage over fear. Thank you for choosing me." And there, in Owen's arms, on a Saturday morning in Cedar Falls, I began to understand that sometimes the greatest bravery is not in facing external dangers, but in being honest with ourselves about who we really are and what we really want. You know, I spent 32 years building a life based on what I thought I should want, what I thought was expected of me, what seemed safe and socially acceptable. But sometimes, life forces us to choose between the safety we know and the authenticity we fear. Sometimes, we need to completely break our protective structures to discover who we really are underneath all the expectations and fears. This is just the beginning of my story of self-discovery, and there is still so much that Owen and I need to figure out about ourselves and about how to navigate this new and scary territory together. There will be challenges. Cedar Falls isn't exactly San Francisco in terms of acceptance, and our professional situation will require care and discretion. But for the first time in years, I'm waking up each day looking forward to what could happen, instead of just hoping that nothing changes. What you hear here is just the beginning. The complete stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. See the link in the description right now. If you related to this journey of breaking down personal barriers and embracing authenticity, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell to not miss the next chapters of this story, because I have so much more to share about how Owen and I are building something real together, despite all the obstacles. In the comments, tell me, have you ever had to choose between safety and personal honesty? What was that experience like? I'd love to read your stories and know that I'm not alone in this journey of discovery. Until the next episode, and thank you for following my transformation from a life of emotional protection to one of authentic courage.